Hey there everyone, this is Lee and welcome to part 5 of my Santa platformer tutorial. In the last video, we used object pooling to create an after image effect that would activate anytime the player used a dash or butt slam ability. In this video, we're going to create a set of tiles and use those tiles to create a map using Unity's 2D Tilemap editor. If you haven't done so already, be sure to check out the previous 4 videos. And with that, on to part 5.
To start off, we first need to make sure we have the necessary packages. So let's go to Window, Package Manager. From here, we want to see all the packages available to install. So in this drop down here, select Unity Registry. Now select the 2D bundle, expand it, and make sure we have the 2D Tilemap editor package, as well as the extras. When we created the project, we selected 2D core, so we should already have these. If not, be sure to install the packages from this window. We want to set up the tiles so we can start building our levels. So in our assets, let's go to the tiles folder and configure the tiles image. We first want to change the sprite mode here to multiple. If you recall, the pixels per unit also need to be 300, like our Santa. And lastly, we make sure the filter mode is point. Next, let's go to our sprite editor. But first, let's apply the changes. We want to slice these into individual sprites. So let's go to Slice, change Automatic to Grid by Cell Size, and change the pixel size to 300 by 300. Click Slice, and then click away from the drop-down. Now we will see squares for where each slice is drawn. We will also have various artifacts of blank slices, which we need to get rid of. So just click on them and delete them. Once we are done, we can hit Apply and close the window. Our sprites are ready, so let's make the tile palette. To open the tile palette, let's go to Window, 2D, Tile Palette. This is where we will create and use a palette to draw our maps. I'm going to set the windows to the side here. Then let's create a new palette and call it Snow Tile. We can keep everything as default and hit Create. It'll ask us to pick a folder to save. Right where we are in the Tiles folder is fine. So let's select this folder. From here, we can expand out the tiles image and see all the individual sprites. We're just going to drag and drop each into our tile palette. It will ask us to name the asset, which I'll leave as default. From there, I will just move each tile and arrange it similar to how the image file itself is laid out, while saving each asset as its default name. For these long brown platforms, we won't implement these, so let's leave them out for now. Let's create a new folder to move all these assets into. And from here, I can just delete these game objects to make way for a new map. To start the map, let's right-click and create a new 2D object, Tilemap Rectangular. This creates a grid parent object and a Tilemap child object, which will store the physical platforms for Santa to move on, which we'll call platforms. Let's change that layer to ground and add a new component, Tilemap Collider 2D. To draw the map, we can go to our tile palette, select the tile we want, and start painting. To paint on this layer, we can click on the active Tilemap drop-down and select the layer we just created. Let's paint this entire tree by selecting the box tool. Selecting the entire tree, select the brush tool. Now we can paint all those tiles directly onto our map. Let's add the snowman as well. To ensure that this draws behind Santa, let's change the order in layer to -1. When we hit play, the platforms have a proper collision, and the decorations don't affect the game. But I do notice that Santa's floating a little, so let's adjust the capsule collider so he's a little closer to the ground. Much better. Now that I'm okay with this configuration, let's make the map. There is a slight problem. Even though I've built the map, the camera will not follow Santa, so it can't actually see my work. Let's write a new script to do that for us. We'll call this camera controller. For this script, we will need a transform target, which the camera will follow. We will also use a vector2 minimum value and maximum value to determine the bounds of the camera. That way it doesn't extend past the beginning and ends of the level where you can see the edges of the map. The logic will be completely inside the update. We first will create a variable based on the target's position. We will then clamp the x and y of that new variable based on the minimum and maximum. We also want to maintain the Z position of the camera. Lastly, we apply those values to the camera's transform position. Vector3v equals target.transform.position. You can just write transform position, but this was muscle memory for me. v.x equals mathf.clamp, v.x, minimum value.x, maximum value.x. We can do the same with the y's as well. For the z, we'll set it to transform.position.z. Then, transform.position equals v. We can drag our script onto the camera. Then drag our Santa into the target variable. Let's go into the game screen and adjust the position to see what our maximum and minimum positions are. For minimum, this will be 3 and 1. The end X will be 191, but I'm going to scroll through the level to see what the maximum height is. The height will be 4, but I noticed in the beginning the wall isn't quite high enough, so I'm going to add onto that. Now the camera will follow us through the level. Let's make our destructible objects. Let's go to the rocks folder and set the assets to 300 pixels per unit. We can do the same for the rock particle asset, but we won't use it for now. The other two we will. Drag the large rock onto the scene. Set the layer to destructible. And add a box collider 2D. Let's do the same with a small rock. And once again, we now have our objects we can destroy. Since we will be constantly using these, I want to be able to make changes to these later on. Let's make them prefabs, or prefabricated objects. Let's make a folder called prefabs, and drag the objects from our scene to the folder. You'll notice the names become blue. This is how we know it's a prefab. In the next video, we will learn how to modify prefabs, but for now, I'm going to add these to our level. To be organized, I'm going to create an empty game object and move all the rocks into it. One thing I've noticed is if you are jumping and run into a wall, Santa tends to stick. We can fix this by using physics materials. Let's create a folder called materials. Then we will right-click, select Create 2D Physics Material 2D. I will call this frictionless and set friction to 0. We can now click on Santa and drag that material into our Capsule Collider 2D material. Over here, I'd like to create some one-way platforms. These are platforms we can stand on, but also pass through from the underside. First, let's go to our tiles image and hit Sprite Editor. We can see that the brown platforms that we ignored before are much too wide. So let's shrink this down to a height of 50 pixels. Let's drag that platform onto the level. We will add a box collider 2D, but also check off Used by Effector. We'll then add a new component called Platform Effector 2D. The blue semicircle you see on screen represents where the collider will be affected, called Surface Arc. You can play around with this value, but I'd like to set it to 150. Let's rename our game object and set it as a prefab by dragging it into our prefab folder. I'm going to adjust the position, then add another one. I also want to change the sprite to make sure they look connected. Let's copy these and move them up here so Santa can reach the top. Oops, I forgot to set this to ground layer. Now it works as it should. Finally, I want to add a layered background. To do this, let's first adjust our camera. We'll set our projection from orthographic to perspective. This will make the camera able to show distance and perspective. And let's set our field of view a bit lower, to 50. And then let's change the background color to a sky blue. Now let's add our background. Inside the background folder, let's drag the first background onto our scene. We'll set the order in layer to -2. Make a copy and hit T on our keyboard to select the rect tool. We'll hold down V while grabbing the bottom left corner and drag it over. This will ensure that our image snaps next to each other. I'm going to repeat this until the background covers the entire level. Now let's make an empty game object to store all of this into. This will be background layer 1. I'll reset the position to 0 and drag the background into that game object. For this, I'll set the Z position to 2. And when I enable 3D in our editor, you'll be able to see that the background is a bit further away from the platforms. Let's make another copy of layer 1 and call it layer 2. We'll also change the Z to 4 and change the sprite of everything inside to the second image. I'm going to repeat this process for all 5 layers. Next, I'll go to the game view so I can see myself adjusting the X and Y positions of the backgrounds. For each layer, I'll move slightly higher and the X slightly off from the previous layer. The last layer is clouds, so I'll move it higher so they look like, well, clouds. And I'll shift everything over to the left so the beginning of the level won't see the edges of the background. I also noticed that the images aren't quite drawing right. So let's go into each layer and adjust the order in layer so they draw in the proper order. Finally, let's hit play and see the fruits of our labor.
And with that, we now have a set of tools that we can make all sorts of maps and levels. Do you have any comments, questions, or concerns? Be sure to leave it in the comments below. And if you like this series, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. In the final video, we're going to wrap it all up with enemies, collectibles, and having an end goal for the game. There's only one more video left in this series, so you definitely want to follow along for that. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.